Good morning. It is November 9th, 2025, 6:22 a.m. The sun is in my favorite position. It's just coming up over the hill. Um, so it's Sunday morning, and I decided to wrap up the Amsterdam series with a few thoughts about the drug situation in Amsterdam and how the Dutch deal with it. It's very different. It's the opposite of the way America deals with it. So I want to talk about that because it's actually going to segue into a series on China because I mentioned the Chinese temple in another audio. And so I started looking, I did a little digging to refresh my memory about when it was built and its name and things like that. And I realized that I had no idea. I lived there from 1999 till like 2002, and it was opened in 2000. But I had no idea at that time that I would actually end up in China for like 10 years or more. So this audio is going to be a segue from my years in Amsterdam. And apparently, this prepared me, or did the temple give me a karmic push? But I certainly had no plans, at this time of ever going or teaching in China. So maybe this audio will help explain that. But I'm going to focus on the heroin problem. I mean, America has an opioid crisis right now, and that's another reason for me to do this is to kind of explain there are other ways to deal with a huge social addiction problem when one particular drug, and every generation there's one drug that's going to be abused by a large group, so this is not a new problem. So I want to talk about how Holland dealt with it. In the 70s and 80s, it was the heroin capital of Europe. And Germany has extremely strict laws about drugs, as did other neighboring countries. So Holland became a magnet for young people, who wanted to use, and with less chance of going to jail for a long time. So it became a problem. And what the Dutch did is the problem was in the red light district. I did a audio about that, but it's this area of Amsterdam which is right next to the port. And remember, Amsterdam is a port city. It is an old European port city. It always has been. It's the basis for their wealth, of which is great. But when you have a port city and ship and goods coming and going, you are going to have all kinds of trafficking. Plus, you have sailors. Now, that explains the red light district. Again, going back hundreds of years, the Dutch understand when you have 1,000 ships come in, each with, several hundred sailors that have been on the ocean for months. They cater to their needs. They always have. So they regulate it rather than forbid it and punish people for doing a human behavior. When it comes to morality, the Dutch lean on not judging, not getting in people's business, and the Chinese are that way too. They don't want to be moral police, but they had to do something. So what they did was called harm reduction. So I'm going to show you a couple of pictures here. Now, this is the Newmarket area or the red light district. Centrum means the center of the city. And this was my area where I live. But by the time I arrived, it had been refurbished from I mean, people were ODing in doorways and on the street. I mean, it's the same with our opioid thing. I mean, on a park bench, people are dying. So But this is that area of town. But I want to draw attention to this sign. It's a new market in Chinese characters. It's a street sign, but this is the Chinese influence showing, because for a long time Chinese gangs have been bringing heroin in. They say in the 80s, they were 70s and 80s, they said it was coming from Turkey, which is kind of code for Afghanistan, Pakistan, that Middle East area. I mean, it was plentiful. So this is why it became a problem. But this is Newmarket Street. And this was, I know, every shop on each side. This would be nighttime, but as you can see, it's perfectly safe. But as you can see, everybody's walking. You know, you see some bicycles here, but you can see how there's absolutely no room for cars. So I felt, even when I'm talking about drugs and heroin and gangs and all this stuff, I live in Sinaloa, Mexico, and am perfectly safe. And, you know, so that's something else I want to emphasize, is that even though bad things happen, they happen everywhere, but that doesn't mean you need to walk into it. I mean, if you have common sense and you're not out late at night, because most of the really bad stuff happens after midnight. So take that for what it's worth, my little safety advice. But this is the same street in the daytime. And this is a Chinese restaurant. Let's see if I can up here. Yeah, let's see. It's a hot pot restaurant, but the Newmarket area today has been turned into kind of like a little Chinatown. And this is the reason why, whoops, yeah, here we go. The He Hua Temple. This is the temple I mentioned in another video. This is how they refurbished a previously drug den area. Is they allowed the temple to be built here. So that was problem number one, is the land. The government kicked in $500,000 guilder, and that's like 200,000. And the Chinese organization, they're a Buddhist organization, they're a charity organization, but their purpose is to serve, there's like 20,000 Chinese immigrants living in Amsterdam. And so this temple is specifically to serve them, but I mean, it serves in the community, but again, this is how they refurbish a previously derelict area. You clean the area up. If you want to get rid of drugs and the crime that comes with them, this is what you have to do. So Amsterdam has always been multicultural and open-minded about different cultures cohabitating together. So now let's get back to the junkie problem. They began a harm reduction program that decriminalized it, because throwing them in jail didn't stop the addiction. So what they did is they decriminalized what they called soft drugs. So that's when cannabis and weed became tolerated. It was never legal. I mean, people always thought weed was legal in Amsterdam. No, it was always listed as an illegal drug, but it was categorized. You would not, it was regulated. So possessing it was not a crime, but possessing it in large amounts was a crime. So you see, this is the whole tolerance thing. For people who are using it for personal use, they didn't want to waste money. They have heroin dealers and Chinese gangs to deal with. So the Dutch are very wise when it comes to spending money. So they weren't going to throw away a lot of law enforcement on pot smokers. Pot smokers were not causing the problem. So this was the first step. So first step was to just tolerate the soft drugs. So then they began, as part of the heroin epidemic. This is also HIV time in the world when AIDS was going rampantly through drug communities. So they were the first to begin dispensing. They opened dispensaries where I'm going to use the word junkies. Youths is what they call them in Holland. What they could go and get clean needles. So that was step number one, is stopping the reuse of dirty needles. They were giving them away. And then they took it another notch and they began safe places. So instead of shooting up on the corner in the park or wherever in an alley, they gave them safe rooms to use to actually inject themselves. And now Europe lost it. Europe really thought that that was insane. But again, you can see their philosophy. They were taking the problem off the street. So everything they do is kind of incremental, step by step by step. How do we manage this problem? So see, they were more worried, I think, about HIV at that time than they were about overdoses. There were like 300 people dying a year from overdosing, but there were a whole lot more contracting AIDS. And think about it. They have socialized healthcare. The government pays for everyone's healthcare. So if you have this surge in AIDS patients, and in the 80s, we didn't have the drugs that they have now. And so these people were going to be treated for a very long time, and many of them died. So it was a huge societal cost to care for the AIDS victims. So step three, after, clean needles, clean places in which to, do your addiction, then they started the methadone program. And I mean, if you want to know anything about does methadone work on opioids, the answer is yes. It does, but they didn't wait for the addicts to come to the clinics. They took the clinics to the addicts. So they had mobile, and to this day, they still have them. They're mobile methadone clinics, and they're buses, and they have a bus route. So, excuse me. So users who are in a program, and I haven't got to the criminal side yet, but those who are truly drug users rather than offenders, this is the system to provide them daily. They just make it very convenient for them to get their daily dose of methadone that keeps withdrawals away. So that's layer number one. Now here comes layer number two, which is where law enforcement does apply their resources. I'm not going to get into a lot about how they regulate weed. I did learn about that from being friends with the owner of the coffee shop, but I really want to focus on how they dealt with the hard drugs. Um, like I said, if you were found, if they thought you were selling, so that's the whole thing about amounts. If you had over a certain amount, there was a presumption that it was not for personal use. It was, for selling. You would be arrested, and junkies, if they remember, when you're addicted and you need money, you're going to steal. And so that's the problem with large populations of junkies. And especially if you have tourists, this is how tourists get robbed. 9 times out of 10, you're going to be robbed by a heroin addict or, a drug addict. So the way the Dutch choose to treat the problem, because they don't want to discourage tourists, they don't want that happening. But how they treat this particular kind of criminal who is offending to support a drug habit, they do arrest them, and it's always petty crimes. Sometimes assault is involved, but just robbery, just stealing stuff and selling it. So what they do is, once that person is in the system, and once they've been arrested, they are not put in regular jail. They go to an addiction prison. And that's, I'm using the word prison, but it's actually a hospital, but it's mandatory. You're not, the state has put you in treatment, so to speak. You can't, because you're in the legal system and your case is pending, you cannot be, you can't get out. You have to stay there in treatment. So that's step one, is they put them in treatment from the moment they enter the legal system, so that as the legal system goes through with their case, by the time they're going to stand up in court, you have a sober, clear-minded person who will be able to understand what is happening. But the judge in this case, this is another huge difference in why it works for them, but it doesn't work in America. This is the stage we have to change. Is the judge, yeah, they have special judges, but it's the same in America. It's not a high level judge. It's a low level judge that are dealing with these petty thefts. A county judge would be the equivalent, in America. And in America, you have the same people and or the same family. You have families that are generational drug dealers, and the judge knows it, the whole community knows it, and they just go in and out of the system, in and out of the system. And we do have programs in America for drug dealers, but that brings up the Kentucky judge and how corrupt. Look at what happens to the poor women that are trying to get clean in that program. No. So America pretends that we treat our criminals who are criminals because they are drug addicts. And so that's bullshit. So I don't go for that. But here's the deal. Let's say the normal sentence would be 6 months in jail for theft. The way their legal system works is if you are a danger to yourself or others, and being a drug addict, especially if you're homeless, if you're unemployed, if all of these things apply to you, the state has the right to keep you in the system, in the care. It's called the care system. So you are being treated. You have a condition, and so it's medical, government, social workers all come together at this point. And so the judge, instead of sending him on to the next level of prison for 6 months, he remands them to the government health system. And so they stay in a facility until they're able to achieve three things: being able to maintain their sobriety. The second is they have to be able to get a job. And if they don't have any job skills, then that's another part of their program is, while they're in care, they will get job training. And the third leg is they cannot be let out into the community without a place to live. So this is where the social workers come in. So you treat the drug addiction. While you are treating the drug addiction, you assess their employment viability, and most are able to work. I mean, once clean and sober and healthy, yeah, they can work. So, jobs, assistance is given, but most importantly is having a place to live. And, there's different accommodations. In America, we have sober living houses. So there's that. They can use that because apartments in Amsterdam are super expensive. But you can see that the way the Dutch choose to treat it is, if you deal with it at the grass level, what the money that they save in the future is you're not having the revolving door of the same people or families coming and going. You're treating the problem. Even if grandma, grandpa, or mom and dad never got treated, and you come from a family that this is how they make their money, it's a way to stop that cycle. So as a result of the judges not throwing, and again, this is a very specific group that that this applies to, that they are not sent to prison, they are sent to medical care. Now, the same applies if you have a mentally ill person who is also offending. And they may be sexual offenders. And the same thing applies is the Dutch are very broad-minded. I mean, they tolerate all kinds of sexual proclivities. What I mean, we've talked about that. That's not the issue. But if your sexual desires are for children, say, well, okay, that's not okay. So, but again, instead of treating them as the bottom of the barrel, which is, understandable why people would feel that, that doesn't prevent the next generation of child sex abusers. But what could is you put pedophiles in treatment. I mean, it just full stop. Maybe we don't have the best results, but the goal is to reduce the offender from offending again. So that's my best explanation of how they deal with it. But I need to take a break because this is getting a little too long. I will come back with the story about the Chinese temple.